Hi, everyone. Welcome. I see everyone coming in today. Very, very excited to have you here for our Talent Collective and Canditech webinar. We are so excited to host today along with Nick over at Canditech. Today, we're going to be talking about skills-based hiring and more specifically, how exactly to build a candidate assessment for any role. I'm particularly really excited about this. I've been in the world of talent acquisition for over 18 years. And I think this still remains a little bit of a mystery to me. You know, you have that recruiter gut intuition on whether someone is going to work out for the role. But as we all know, gut intuition and gut instinct isn't always, spot on, right? So how do we assess talent and keep it really skills based? So today, Nick is actually going to be walking us through how to create job simulations that actually work for what a candidate will do in their job. So super, super excited about this. A couple other just housekeeping items before I pass things over to Nick. So attendees, welcome. We're so excited to have you. I always love to have this space as a way to network and feel free to introduce yourself. Put your name and your LinkedIn in the chat and connect with one another. This is always a really good way to meet other folks in the industry that care about similar things to what you care about, right? So go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. And as Nick is going about his presentation today, please put any questions in the chat as well. So if it's relevant to what we're talking about right now, we'll try to keep an eye on those and pull in those questions as we go. Or we may hold off until the end if it's a little bit outside of what the current topic is. So put those questions in the chat, and we are recording today. So if you need to hop off early or if you want to go back and reference anything, you don't need to be taking a bunch of screenshots throughout his presentation. We will send that recording out afterwards. So again, huge, huge thank you to Nick and the Canditech team. We're also really excited because they have offered a free 1 month access to their platform after today's call. So we'll send you a link with the recording of the video today as well. That's going to include being able to send assessments to up to 50 candidates. So I think that's a really generous offer today. And then for those of you who don't know what Talent Collective is, maybe this is your first event or you've heard of us but aren't really sure of what we do. So Talent Collective is a community for women in the recruiting space. We host amazing webinars and other workshops just like this, but we also host a lot of in-person events all around the US, and we're starting to actually expand to, we have a Barcelona chapter actually opening this year as well. So check us out if you ever have questions. Feel free to check out our website or reach out to me directly. I'm happy to answer any questions. We have a membership where you can get mentorship and go to peer group meetings and all sorts of good stuff. So enough with that. Welcome everyone. Would love to take this opportunity to pass it to Nick so he can introduce himself and Canditech here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Krista. And thank you for setting up the session as well. By the way, if you need anyone to go to Barcelona to do some speaking in person, I will nominate myself for that. Appreciate everyone joining the session today as well. We're really excited to spend some time with you. And we're going to focus on skills-based hiring, particularly in the AI age, and then how you can go about building skill assessments for candidates for any role in your organization. Before we jump into that, just as a very quick introduction, I'm Nick. I'm the Director of Customer Success here at Canditech. So primarily I'm focused on ensuring that all of our customers are getting value from their partnership with us. And typically that means I get to spend a lot of time with TA leaders and TA folk talking about the best ways to embed skills-based hiring into their process in a way that it drives efficiency for their recruiters, their hiring managers, and also promotes a really strong candidate experience. Bit about my background. I've been in TA and HR tech for about 16 years, predominantly focused on top of funnel hiring challenges. In terms of an agenda for the session, I'm keen just to give a little overview about Canditech for anyone who isn't familiar with what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. But we'll focus most of the session today on skills-based hiring and job simulations. both what they are, the theory behind them, and what the data suggests, but also the best practices when it comes to building out your own job simulations. And at the end of the session, we'll actually jump into Canditech and I'll show you how the platform works. Now, everything we do run through today, you can do without Canditech. Yet, as Krista mentioned, you will have access to use the platform for 30 days. So you can start sending out assessments to candidates who are actively applying to your roles at the moment. To give you some context about what we do at Canditech and why we're able to speak about this subject so confidently, we're an AI skills assessment platform. We're an all-in-one solution. So we cover every function within an organization from data, sales, finance, legal, marketing, engineering. And this is what we do. So we support companies, some of the largest brands globally, so they can embed skills-based hiring into their process to help them evaluate candidates' hard skills, soft skills, tech skills, and of course, AI skills. And this then allows them to go on to make objective, data-driven hiring decisions, and very importantly, avoid making expensive mishires. And we predominantly cover the UK, the US, but we support companies all over the globe. And actually, through the platform, you can translate assessments into any spoken language on the planet. And with our technology, you can actually automatically score video and open text responses in any spoken language on the planet using AI as well. Within our library, we have over 500 pre-built assessments that you can use as plug and play, as well as the ability to build out your own completely custom tailored assessments that suit your needs and the skills that you're trying to assess based on what you're evaluating in the process. Now, we're trusted by some of the largest leading global brands who have the highest standards when it comes to their hiring process, their candidate experience, and also testing validity. And we support them so they can build out and roll AI-powered job simulations in their process. Companies like Monday.com, Wix, Fiverr, Deloitte, EY, and Equinox. And also, just so you know, our platform integrates with over 40 different applicant tracking systems, pretty much all the ones that people use. We have a connection to, and this allows our customers to set up really interesting workflows and automations that will move candidates to different stages within the ATS based on the score they're getting in the assessment. So, further just reducing their manual workload very early on in the funnel. Now, we were founded just over 6 years ago, and our founders were leaders in the gaming industry and big tech companies like Microsoft and Google. And when they were hiring managers and they were growing their teams, hiring tons of people, they could not believe how hard it was to identify who actually had the skills to do the job. And from that frustration of reviewing hundreds of resumes, meeting with tons of candidates, came the idea for Canditech. And Canditech is a solution that allows you to put skills at the front and center early on in the hiring process. So that's enough about us. So we can jump into the session now. And as you know, we're in the AI age. And as great as that is, in many ways, it has created very unique challenges when it comes to hiring, particularly at the early stage of the funnel. Most companies are relying on CVs to determine which candidates they should invite into the process and they should invest time into. But those CVs only tell part of the story, particularly with the tools that are available to candidates now, where they can use AI to not only write their CV, but to match their CV to the specific keywords in your job description, which they can do, by the way, at scale for hundreds of applications at the click of a button. The CVs are now becoming a lower trust signal. And when the candidate does that, those CVs come into your ATS, which is ranking them using AI based on how many of the keywords in your job description they match. So it becomes a bit of a loop. So what we're trying to enable companies to do is determine which candidates are the right fit by not solely relying on CVs. Another thing about CVs is that they are self-reported documents. Candidates, rightfully so, they want to stand out, they want to get the job, so they are trying to position themselves in a way that makes them look great. But that doesn't tell you if they're someone who can actually perform the task you want them to perform to the standard that you want them to perform it to. So a lot of companies are now switching to embed skills-based hiring earlier on in their process. And that's because the research shows that skills-based hiring can predict a candidate's success in a role 5 times better than relying on their education. and more than twice as well as relying on their work experience. So the question becomes, when we're evaluating a candidate, can this person actually do the job? So by focusing on evaluating their ability and their skills, we can now focus our hiring decisions on objective work-based samples rather than just looking at their education, their degrees, their previous job titles, the types of companies they've worked for. We can prioritize real-world ability over those credentials. And there's a few ways you can approach embedding skills-based hiring into your organization. Today, we'll focus very much on job simulations, but just so you know what the others include, you can run skills mapping. You could also standardize your interview process and the interview structure. And also, some companies continuously assess and evaluate candidates throughout their employment, starting in the hiring process all the way through to their onboarding and beyond. As a side note, we won't dwell on this today. We'll focus on job simulations, but when it comes to skills mapping, it can be very challenging to identify which skills you should be mapping as a must-have skill versus a nice-to-have skill because a lot has changed with the introduction of AI. You might be thinking, what do I mean? So, as an example, let's just say in the past you might have hired a finance person, and a prerequisite of the role is that they needed to have, a certain level of language proficiency so they could email your customers, in a way that they'd understand in English. But now with ChatGPT, anyone can just put what they want to say into ChatGPT. It will restructure that as an email that anyone can understand. So that becomes less of a must-have skill and not something that you should really be failing candidates if they don't have that. And another thing to keep in mind is with AI, you shouldn't just focus on, if you're hiring a developer, for example, how they write code, or if there's a marketing manager, not just about how they would think about creative ideas, but how they use AI to help them do that and how they would leverage it. So if you are thinking about skills mapping, just be conscious of that as you're rolling out that process on your side. But as I said, we'll focus on job simulations today, and how you can embed them into your process. All of the research suggests that assessments that mimic the actual job are considered to be the best predictor and the most objective predictor of future job performance. And there's research that dates as far back as the 70s that speaks to this. So, a job simulation allows you to see how someone would perform a real world task if they were employed and working in your organization, or give you a sense of how they behave in a scenario that they'd actually encounter if they were working in your team. So doing this would allow you to then assess not only their hard skills, but their soft skills, their technical skills, and their AI abilities as well. And really importantly, you can structure these for any type of role that you're hiring within your organization. And to give you a few examples, let's just say you were hiring for a finance person or a marketing analyst. You could give them access to Excel or a spreadsheet and then a real day-to-day scenario they would encounter. And you could ask them to complete a challenge, something like, it's the end of the month. You need to provide your manager a full analysis of how a campaign's performed and how much income the company had generated, and then break that down based on the different channels that came from. And you can then see how they would perform that actual task in the assessment. Or maybe you're hiring for a developer, so you could include a coding challenge and see how they would react. Something like, it's your first day on the job, you need to deploy a new version of the platform, but we've noticed there's a bug. We're going to release in 15 minutes. You need to solve it before we deploy. Please go and write a fix and solve it. And you can see how not only they perform that task, but how they work under pressure. They're given a very short time window. These things happen all the time when you're in a role. So it's a great way to assess how they would handle that sort of situation. You can also give conversation simulations for people in support roles, call center roles, or just really any people-facing roles to see how they would handle those types of simulations. And you can add video questions into really any assessment that you're running. So for instance, you could have a salesperson, you could have them record a pitch to a client, or you could give them some objections and then they have to record their answers and their rebuttals, and talk about how they would overcome certain things like that in different sales conversations. And the good thing about having video questions is that it allows you not only to assess a candidate's soft skills, but you can also get an understanding of their logic, their thought process, and how they're coming to conclusions they're coming to when giving them more objective questions as well. So if they have something that's a bit more deterministic, where it's a right or wrong answer, you can then ask them to explain how they came to that solution. And sometimes what you'll find is someone actually got the answer to the main question incorrect, but their logic and their thinking was so sound that it's someone that your hiring team can work with and is excited about getting into process to learn a bit more about their experience. And of course, finally, it does give you a really good indication into their communication skills, how they present themselves, and that's important for many stakeholder facing roles and client facing roles as well. And of course, can't talk about any of this without talking about AI. And you'll get to see how they work with AI. So how they structure their prompts and prompt engineer, how they would deal with, tasks at scale. So for example, you could give them a task that normally would take 10 minutes, but give them 2 minutes to do it and see how they could utilize AI to be more productive and efficient. Um, and also you can see how they could cope with something that's slightly outside of their area of expertise. So for example, in our platform, we have the question, where an engineer has to solve a coding challenge, but in a language called Rust, which is not a commonly used language. And to do that, they have to work with the LLM to convert their knowledge of maybe Java or Python or whatever they're most comfortable coding with, to then figure out how they can convert that and transfer that knowledge to generate code that's in Rust. Now, the main idea really across all of these examples is that you just want to mimic what the actual job will look like, so you can then see how those candidates will perform the job and then assess both their soft skills throughout the process. So from a candidate experience side, it's important to share that this gives candidates a really engaging experience from all of the studies that have been done, and we do tons of surveys ourselves, because it creates something called face validity, which means effectively the candidates understand why they're answering the specific questions you're asking of them. So, for example, if I was in sales and I was asked to pitch to the camera, I would understand why I'm being asked to perform that task. Whereas if I was in the finance team, that wouldn't make as much sense to me. So having that face validity builds trust in the company and the process. And they also appreciate that they get a chance to test ride the role. They get a sense of what the role would feel like very early on in the process, and they get to showcase their experience and their skills. A lot of the things I read from candidates who are frustrated in the hiring process comes from the fact that they apply, that application goes into a black hole, and then suddenly they get an auto rejection and they don't know why. Yet when they go through an assessment, they know that they've been objectively evaluated, and if they don't make it, it's because of their skills. And that creates a really positive overall candidate experience. So, if we knew that job simulations have been the highest predictor of future job performance as far back as the 70s, you might be wondering why they haven't been as widely adopted up until now. And it's pretty simple, really. But effectively, in the past, before the technology we have access to right now, creating these simulations was a very long, a very cumbersome process that was very expensive and required a ton of manual work. And today you can just do this at the click of a button. So previously, before AI, to create a job simulation would take time, people gathering together, designing the questions, thinking about the right answers. That was a very costly process. Now you can do that within minutes. Scoring the assessments would require someone from the team going through every single answer and reviewing them and seeing if this is an acceptable answer or not. Again, you can now automate this whole process. For high volume hiring, doing all of this at scale before Gen AI was introduced, presented a whole host of challenges, but now you can do that very easily. And again, the same for supporting pretty much any role in your organization. That would have taken a lot of time to build out multiple assessments across multiple functions. And the candidate experience previously would have been really generic, but now you can really keep it tailored and personalized. I'll show you how we think about doing that when we jump into the demo later on in the call today. So at this point, you might be thinking, great, and you like the sound of job simulations, but what about the personal touch and interviews and speaking and spending time with candidates? And the simple answer is a job simulation should not substitute in time, real time with the candidate in the interview process. But what it should do is allow you to identify very quickly which candidates are worth you prioritizing and investing that time into, so you can bring the right candidates into the process for a more in-depth, long, detailed discussion. Once you have an objective signal that this candidate is a good fit, they have the right skills, they have the ability to actually perform the tasks that you need them to perform in the role. Something I also get asked a lot is what stage of the funnel should you implement job simulations? And the simple answer is that it just depends on the role, the seniority of the role, and also the region. In some cases, especially for high volume or blue collar roles, I'd recommend putting assessments right at the start, even before a recruiter screen, just after the candidate applies to the role. And that could be a very short assessment. For example, if it was a entry-level sales role, you might ask them to record a pitch or write a follow-up email to a customer. If it was a support role, it might be a situational judgment test, like how would you respond to this specific scenario? But for something more senior, you might want it to come just after the recruiter screening call. But when you do that, you can now change the flow of the recruiter screening call. And rather than spending time with the candidate to go through qualification and understand their technical ability, you can just get them very excited about the opportunity, get them invested into who you are and what you do, and then invite them to take the assessment. And if they pass, you can then spend more time with them and introduce them to your hiring team. A really good example is we work with a company in England who hire junior data analysts. They have about 1,500 people that apply to their roles, which typically would take a lot of time for them to sift, review, and screen those candidates. So they decided to send an assessment straight after people applied. Within the first week, 85% of who they invited completed the application. And 10 days after that, two candidates were hired. And they only invited the top 5% into the process. And actually, that ended up being about 10 candidates. And once those 10 candidates had passed the assessment, they then looked at their CV, but that saved them looking at 1,490 CVs that just weren't candidates who actually had the skills that they needed. So it's very hard to talk about assessments without talking about cheating, particularly job simulations or at-home exams. So when it comes to assessments, we recommend leveraging AI-powered behavior monitoring tools that flag suspicious activity. This could be detecting unusual patterns like copy and paste, tab switching, inconsistent typing rhythms. You might want to look at IP address tracking to see if people are trying to use multiple devices. So I'd recommend utilizing tools that would allow you to do that. But also there's things like question randomization. So no candidate sees the questions in the exact same order. That allows you to keep the way you're assessing the candidates proprietary as well. Of course, in Canditech, we have a ton of technology and proctoring tools that you can utilize, but there's other things out there that you can leverage. So we would just recommend finding solutions that flag suspicious behavior so you're aware if candidates are trying to do things that may indicate that they're cheating during the assessment. A lot of people ask me this, if we should allow the use of ChatGPT or Google search in an assessment. And we've actually seen a very interesting shift when it comes to AI. At the beginning, companies asked us to prevent it. They said it felt like cheating. They wanted us to build tools that would detect and monitor AI usage. But over time, that mindset's changed. And companies are now asking us to help them assess how someone uses AI because it's a tool. ChatGPT is a tool that most people are using every day in their role. Similar to how you would assess communication or teamwork, you want to understand how candidates use AI in their work, whether that's writing an email, writing code, brainstorming creative ideas. So the question becomes not how do we prevent it, but how do we allow them to do it or use it whilst keeping the assessment fair? So what you really want to do is provide the candidate the ability to utilize the language model in a way that you can oversee how they've done that. So you can understand how they've structured their prompts, how they've come to the conclusions that they have when they're using it. But at the end of the day, it really just depends if you want to give the candidate this option, if AI is actually part of this job. So if it's not part of the role, and they wouldn't be using AI on a daily basis, then you wouldn't need to give them the access. But if it is something they would have access to if they're employed and they're working in a team, then we would always recommend giving them the access to use AI in a way that you can oversee how they've done that. So, how would you build effective job simulations? Firstly, as I've said many times, you want to simulate the job as much as possible. You really want to mimic tasks they would perform if they were employed and working in the team. You also want to assess both hard skills and soft skills because people don't work in a vacuum. You don't just want to see how they came to an objective decision. You want to understand their thought process around it, how they would then communicate those ideas with other team members if they're working in the team. You also want to ensure that it's an ethical and non-biased assessment in terms of the questions that you're asking. For example, you wouldn't want to ask someone who's based in the US how the UK London Underground system works. So you just want to make sure that it's fair and it's questions that they should reasonably understand. You also want to keep it short and keep it timed. The reason we recommend keeping it timed, firstly, is so every candidate is going through the assessment in the exact same time window because if one candidate completed an assessment, but it took them a week, and another candidate completed the same assessment within an hour, you're not really comparing apples to apples in that situation. So, to get a more objective insight, you'd want to make sure that all candidates are completing it in the exact same window of time. And another reason to keep it short is so that candidates don't feel like they're being overwhelmed and asking to do, loads of things, but just to get a really good flavor of what they're able to do and how they would perform in the role. Now, in terms of the length of the assessment, when I say keep it short, that should be a reflection of the level of the role in terms of seniority and also the complexity of the role. If it's an entry-level role, short might mean 10 minutes. If it's a more senior, more complex role, short might mean 1 hour. So it does depend on a role by role basis. And finally, monitor it with cheating detection tools, as we just spoke about a moment ago.
I have a quick question, Nick.
Hey,
On the timing it, I was just thinking about, I have kids in school, and there are some children who may have a learning disability or need accommodations. Do you get requests from your clients about that, right? Like a candidate might say, like, I need a longer period of time to complete this because of XYZ. And how do you advise on that?
Yeah, great question. So there's two things here to talk about. If we're talking about someone needing more time to complete the assessment so they can go away and have a quiet space without the distractions of what's going on at home, then what we recommend is giving the candidate up to a 7-day window to start the assessment. But once they start it, they're then locked in to the time that you've set for the assessment. So let's say you send it on a Monday, they can return at any time within the next 7 days, but the second they begin it, whatever the time that you set for the assessment, once that begins, that clock is then going down.
Mhm.
The reason we recommend this is, for the reasons you've suggested, but also when we look at the data, a lot of candidates take assessments on the weekend or at very weird and wonderful times in the day, like 3 in the morning, I've seen, very late in the evening. So it gives the candidate the flexibility to take the assessment when works for them, which promotes a really inclusive hiring process.
Mhm.
If someone just needed additional time and they needed, some assistance so they could be fairly evaluated for, reasons maybe they just for other reasons, then you can give them an extra 25% to complete the assessment, and it's very easy to do that. In our system, or if you're not using Canditech, there'd be different ways to do that, but you would do that on a case by case basis.
Mhm. Mhm. Great. Thank you.
Awesome. No worries. When it comes to assessing AI skills, firstly, you always want to look at someone's AI proficiency. So, what do I mean by that is things like prompt engineering. How do they iterate when they're speaking to a language model? Sometimes you'll type one thing into ChatGPT. I don't know if it's me, but it never understands me the first time. So you then need to iterate and work with it to get to the right result. I'm seeing Tanisha smile there, so it's not just me, which is great. And you want to see how they would refine and do that. But also, you want to understand their general AI literacy and proficiency. But if you want to go a little bit more in depth and understand how they would work with ChatGPT based on different situations, you can present the candidate with really practical scenarios. So there's something called an efficiency challenge where you can give a candidate a task that they should know how to do. So, for example, you're a recruiter, go and source 10 candidates, but you give them a very short amount of time to do it, and you see how much more productive they can be when they've got access to AI. You could also give them something that's called a novel problem solver, where you give them something that's just slightly outside of their area of expertise, then you ask them to complete a task. So, for example, it could be, hey, you're a sales executive. Typically, you're researching prospects, but actually, we want to see how you would research a company who's coming up for a renewal. Slightly outside of their core area, but a skill they should understand and should be able to prompt engineer. And finally, you can ask them to conduct brainstorming or ideation, doing creative work that maybe a marketer would do using AI as well. And you can see how they would guide the tool to come to their solutions and if they're being coherent in the way that they're working with the LLM. So really you're not just evaluating the output. The output is the output, but you want to see how they got to that output and how they were thinking about using AI along that journey. So this is a mixture on this screen of our own data and some broader data in terms of the impact that job simulations have on your process. But ultimately, what we find is they help you cut interview hours by 80%. So your recruitment team, your hiring team are spending less time with the wrong candidates and investing more time into the right candidates. Also allows you to reduce your time to hire significantly for the same reason. We see time to hire reductions of up to 50%, which is always great because in turn that then saves money, resources, allows the team to kick off projects faster, focus on the things that are important, right? The other higher value tasks. Now, I do want to jump into the platform just so I can walk you through how Canditech works. Before doing that, just to flag again, everyone on this call will get access to use Canditech for 30 days, completely free of charge. You can actually build assessments, you can share them with candidates. We can support you with that as well. So if you just scan the QR code, I think Talia has dropped a link into the chat as well, and we'd be happy to set up additional calls and walk you through things in more detail. I'll pause there whilst I get my screen ready to walk through Canditech, but I'm happy to take any questions as I do that. Nice, okay. If you just give me one sec. Okay, great. I'm just going to share my screen again. Great. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Brilliant. Awesome. So what I'd love to do is walk you through Canditech. I'm really keen to show you firstly how this looks on the candidate side. We've spoken a lot about how you would set these up, but it's good to see what that looks like on the other side of the table. Then I'll walk you through how you can actually go about building assessments yourself, and then some of the scoring and the analytics that we collect as you take candidates through this process. One thing I do just want to mention about Canditech specifically is that we keep the UI very simple and easy to navigate. There's only ever two tabs you need to worry about. That's the assessment tabs and the candidate. Within the assessments tab, you can see all of the assessments that have been shared with your account, all the ones that you've created yourself, and a ton of data related to each assessment. If I jump in to show you how this looks for a candidate, we never want a candidate to feel like they're taking an assessment from us, and we'd recommend if you're rolling out your own job simulations that you fully brand them so a candidate feels like they're inside your process. So in this case, we would include the logo, the background, you can edit the welcome messaging or any of the copy that's within here. And then we've got Krista now on two screens. So hey, Krista again. Then you can add videos and you can do personalized videos for every single role that you're hiring for. You could have the hiring manager record a quick introduction, talking about the role, welcoming the candidate to the assessment, wishing them the best of luck, whichever way you want to run it, or you could just have an overarching employer brand video. The candidate will see all of the assessment instructions and what to expect. They'll also be made aware that there will be proctoring and cheat detection. In our case, it will be things like tab change detection, copy and paste detection, IP address switching. We also have the ability to take webcam snapshots to make sure the candidate is in front of their screen at all times, taking the assessment by themselves, not looking at external resources, for example. And then they'll also see a breakdown of what to expect in the assessment. So how many sections there are, how long they have for each section in terms of time, the types of questions in each section as well. If a candidate does need any assistive technology, we do have a full accessibility plugin that they can turn on themselves at any time within the platform, and that will give them access to things like screen readers, text readers, screen adjusters, just so they feel very comfortable to take the assessment in a way that works best for them. I will just switch over into the actual assessment now. And again, we keep everything fully branded as you go through the experience. So you'll see the logo remains in the top left corner. And now the candidate can see the time limit counting down. So they know, okay, it's time to work. And I like to include this within this assessment that I show on the demo because it just gives you an example of how you can run these job simulations we spoke about in the deck. So here is a marketing campaign question. The candidate is being asked to review the marketing data and the campaign performance, and they can actually jump into the sheet and they can start adding in their own formulas as well. And when you're actually reviewing the results later on, once the candidate completes it and you're looking at the test report, you can see exactly how they got to the conclusions they got to. You can jump into the sheet, you can see all the formulas, or you can just allow it to be automatically scored and just see what they achieved in the score if you don't want to spend time reviewing everything in finer detail. Anytime we have a question like this that's a bit more objective, we recommend, as I mentioned, having that open text or video question so you can get a sense of the thought process and the logic behind the outcome the candidate got to, but also it acts as an additional layer of proctoring. Because if the candidate is unable to explain how they got to the solution they got to, then it's going to give you a bit of a signal. Now, if a candidate in our platform comes out of Canditech and they go to an external source, such as this one, and they copy some text over, and then they come back to the platform, we'll notify them, hey, we've just seen you switch tabs. And we'll record every single event of this happening. And when you're reviewing the test report, you'll see which section they were in, how long they were in it before they left, and how long they left for before they came back. And if you're seeing multiple occurrences of someone leaving for a couple of minutes at a time, that's going to provide you a very clear signal. Let's say a candidate went a step further and they actually pasted text in. Again, we're going to notify them, make them aware that we're recording this, and it's up to them if they want to continue doing it or not. We have a ton of multiple choice sections that you can jump into. You can also very easily build out your own multiple choice questions. I won't go through these in too much detail, but it does give you a good assessment of someone's foundational knowledge of the role or the subject area that you're hiring for. The next question I love to show in these demos purely to give you an example of how much you can customize and tailor these assessments. So in this case, we've got a video and then we're asking a question related to that video. But you could have a sound clip, a file, a document, an image. You could have a recording of a customer call and a customer complaining, and then ask the candidate to explain how they would respond to the complaint. Or it could be an image of an email. Hey, how would you respond to this? So you can really tailor these to fit whatever the role is that you're hiring for and to mimic the sort of tasks that they would be performing in that job. I'll move over just to show you how it would look if you had a slightly more technical position you were hiring for. This here is a SQL question where the candidate can see what they need to achieve and the data, the outcome they need to get to. Then they can actually jump into the environment and they can run their code as well. So this is the extent of my coding abilities that you're seeing at the moment, but they can run it and then they can call the user table. Now, if they make a slight mistake, like a spelling mistake, like this, we will make them aware because we're not trying to judge someone being perfect, but we do want to see that they can get to the right outcome eventually. And all of this is recorded so your team can play the full progress back to see the keystrokes the candidate took to get to the solution that they did. As I mentioned, when we have these sort of questions where there is a yes or no answer, was it right or wrong? We always follow that up. So in this case, we've got a video question where the candidate can record themselves, they can record an answer, and if they still have time left, they can review their answer, and if they want, they can record it again, and they can keep going as long as the time allows them to do so. Now, we have the ability to auto score both open text questions and video questions using AI, and I'll walk you through how we do that shortly. Yet, anytime we auto score a video question, we never give AI the video. We only give it the transcript of the video because we don't want AI to see their gender, their race, their ethnicity, their tone of voice, their body language. We want to keep things really objective and bias free, but your team can still review the video when they're looking at the test report. So if they want to see how did this candidate come across, how did they present themselves, and what was their spoken language like, they can access that and they can play the video back. I will just show you one final question type, which is a technical question. So here the candidate can see the instructions, they can then jump into an IDE and they can start coding. Now we have the ability to give candidates access to every back-end language and every front-end language, and you can either do that or you can restrict the candidate to the language that your team develop in. Let's say it was Python, you can turn off every other language but Python. Now, you've probably seen on the side of my screen throughout this assessment, we've got these two logos over here. So this is how we embed ChatGPT and Google Search into these assessments. So for any question type, a candidate can open up this over here and they can start working with the LLM. So in this case, if I type in something much less interesting than I'm sure your candidates will, you can then review this whole conversation when you're looking at the test report once the candidate submits their assessment. If you just broadly want to understand how someone researches, maybe you're hiring an AE and you want to see how they would market map or research prospects or review a financial report, they can then use Google search and you can see the full journey that they take as they go through Google search as well. When the candidate submits the assessment, they are then given the opportunity to leave their feedback and complete a survey. And as I mentioned before, we see very high and very positive candidate feedback when it comes to the assessments that they're taking. If I flip back to the platform, I will very quickly show you how it would look when you're reviewing the test report. But I do want to mention if you're integrated with your ATS, all of this data automatically transfers into there. So you'll see the score the candidate got, you'll see a section by section breakdown, and you'll also get a link to a full test report that would look like this, where you can break everything down in granular detail. So you can see the total score. You do get some interesting benchmarking data to see how that compares to other candidates. You get the same related to a section by section breakdown. There's some visual data you can look at. This is where you can see any of the suspicious behavior. So if it's red, there's something you want to look into a bit further. If it's green, it's all good. So for example, if I open up this suspicious pasting over here, I can actually see there were 3 events that were suspicious, and I can play them back and I can see what happened. So I can see there was some text that was typed in, it was removed, and then a big block of text suddenly appeared. And I can see that for every single event where it happened in the assessment. If they switch tabs, I can open that up and I can see where they were, when they left, and how long they left for. If someone just left for 10 seconds once in the assessment, you might think maybe a pop-up or something by accident. But if they have multiple series of them doing this, then it's something you definitely want to pay attention to. And finally, if they were using ChatGPT or Google search, you can open that up and see the whole history of the communications they had with the LLM. Now, if your team are reviewing the reports, they can leave their comments, notes, they can thumbs up, thumbs down, they can tag other team members in the report so they can jump in and hear their feedback and thoughts. And then you can look through everything in much more granular detail. So if you really wanted to, you could open up that Google Sheet, you could look at the formulas that were put in here, and you can then look at the answers to pretty much every question. This here is an example of an open text question that has not been scored with AI. So right now, the hiring manager, sorry, would have to come into here and manually decide, is this a 1-star answer or up to a 5-star answer, and then score it. But if I just scroll past these multiple choice questions, here's an example of an AI scored open text answer, where we had multiple agents running on this question that's assessing both the candidate's language proficiency, sorry, and then also we had a custom agent that we set up. So if I open up the language score, I can see that there were no spelling or grammar mistakes that were found. So the AI gave the score a 5 out of 5, but I actually jumped in and manually adjusted that score from a 5 to a 2. Just to show you again that it's never a black box, it's super transparent. You can see how AI is doing what it's doing. And if you want to override it and change it, you can. And by changing it, it then informs it moving forward for any other candidate who is going through the scoring agent. If you build out a custom agent, that's effectively inputting your own tailored scorecard against that role. In this case, we had 3 rules that we set up that the candidate would mention target audiences, they would explain their logic behind their decisions, and they would include basic creative ideas. In this case, the candidate only achieved one of those rules and not the other 2, therefore they got a 2-star answer. But again, we could manually override that if we wanted to. Here you can see a full breakdown of some of the technical questions. You could replay the video back if you wanted to as well, so your team can see and get a sense of who this candidate is. And finally, you can replay all of the progress within the technical question too. So if you wanted to see exactly how they did what they did, you can play that back and share that with your hiring team. I'll move back over into Canditech to show you how you could actually build out these assessments yourself. So there's a few things just to highlight. We do have a team of psychometricians led by Dr. Moran Seller, who's a PhD in cognitive behavior, and that team can support you to actually build out validated assessments that provide the right signals based on the skills you're trying to assess, and we can collaborate with you to do so. If you wanted to build these yourself, you can use our AI builder, a little bit like using ChatGPT, but you could paste in the job description and this will build out the assessment for you. Now, you're able to edit, change, and customize what it builds, but it will build out a really solid foundation. Previously, the way this worked is it would have to go into our library of over 500 sections and find the corresponding sections that relate to your role. But now it can autonomously create sections that don't exist already based on your requirements. So if you have a really niche role, it's really interesting to jump into here, work with the AI builder to build out the initial foundation. If you wanted to just build your own assessment, you can click create an assessment. And from here, you have two options. You could either go into our library or you could build questions from scratch. If I jump into our library, it's split out in a few different ways. So you
Looks like we might be losing Nick.
Nick, you froze. It seems like it's really just a connection problem.
Yeah.
Um, if he
Hey,
doesn't come
sorry,
up,
I think I froze
he's
for a second, but
froze.
I'm
There
back.
we
Sorry about that. So it's broken down in a variety of ways. So you can go based on job specific skills, as I mentioned here. We also have a full cognitive skills section. Let me just reload this. I think, sorry, my internet. Great, you can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Um, yeah, sorry, my bit buggy. But anyway, we've got a full section for cognitive skills, things like attention to detail, critical thinking, organization. We've also got personality tests, so the DIS model, the Enneagram, things that look at traits like openness, conscientiousness, dominance, and you can always add these as sections to broader assessments. We've got a full section for AI skills that looks at things like prompt engineering, AI literacy, we've actually got AI sections that relate to specific job types. So how to utilize AI in sales, how would you utilize it in customer success or marketing, for example. Then leadership and management skills and also generic skills. When you're looking at the assessments, you can actually click onto them to see a preview of what the assessment section entails. And here you can see how long it's time for. Is it easy, moderate, or hard? And then the question types within the section. So here I can see there's a coding question here and a video question. If I wanted, I could just come into the search bar and type in the skill I'm trying to assess, and then I can see all of the sections that relate to that. If I add in a section to an assessment by adding the questions, I can completely change and customize what's here. First, I can change the time limit, so how long we want to give candidates for this section of the assessment. And if this isn't a must-have essential skill, maybe you'll make this a little bit less of a weighting than something that is super essential. And I can change the point weighting over here. If I want to edit the question itself, I can press this pencil and actually change the wording of the question. I could add videos, files, links, text, and we've got an AI assistant to help you structure the question in the best way so the candidate fully understands what you're trying to ask them to achieve and the outcome you want them to come to. If you wanted to just add your own question from scratch, these are all the question types that we support. So multiple choice, open text, video, Google Sheets, Excel, coding, SQL. Let's say you wanted to add an open text question. You could say, why is X? And then you want to set AI auto scoring. So to do that, you can come over to here and we've got a few different options. One is we have pre-built agents. So our team has spent a lot of time training that cover things like language proficiency and pretty much any spoken language on the planet. And by the way, you could also have the assessment translated into any spoken language on the planet and also conflict resolution and objection handling. So really customer or people facing evaluations. We also have the ability for you to provide example answers. This is called a similarity model, where your team can provide either answers that they've received from previous candidates, or they could design their own answers. And they could say, this would be a 1-star answer, this a 3-star, this a 5-star. And then AI can score the new candidate's answer against the reference answers that you've provided. Or finally, you can build your own custom agents. Like I said earlier, like building out your own tailored scorecard. So let's say this was a marketing role. You could say something like mentioned using Google Analytics to review the campaign results. Then you could add that as a rule. And you could add as many rules as you want to the custom agent. So it's scoring against exactly what you're hoping to see from the candidate answer. And again, this is for both open text and video questions, so you're not spending a ton of time manually reviewing every single answer that candidates are sharing in the assessments. The last thing I just want to highlight is when candidates come through the assessments, we collect a lot of data, and really we don't want people to embed skills-based hiring and assessments into their process for the sake of doing it. It should really provide you a signal that you see later on in the funnel affecting your pass-through rate. So, you should see a higher quality of application to hiring manager, of screening to hire. Now you've got these assessments in place. And what we love to do is over time review the data to see if there's any areas we can continuously optimize and improve the assessments. So you can see a full breakdown of the scoring section by section, the minimums, the averages, how long it takes candidates to complete. So if it looks like one section is way too easy and too many candidates are passing it, but still failing at the hiring manager stage, we'll use that data to work collaboratively with you to update the assessment, maybe make it harder, add more sections, speak to the hiring team to see, hey, why are people still failing? Use that insight to build out sections that then filter those candidates from ever getting to that stage. So a lot that we can do to continuously optimize and improve the assessments that you roll out in your process. So it's a lot of talking from me. So I will pause there. I'll stop screen sharing. I'd love to hear if there's any questions. And like I said, Talia has shared the link in the chat. So anyone who would like access to Canditech for 30 days, please do follow the link. You can create an account and start building out your own assessments that you can share with candidates. Hopefully that you've got in the process at the moment.
Amazing. Thank you, Nick. Gosh, I almost every screen you showed, I was like, oh, I love that. Oh, I love that. Oh, I love that. I'm sure there are questions. So as people think about them, throw them into the chat. But I actually have a couple to kick us off, if you don't mind.
Sure,
Um,
yeah.
so when you were showing the part about the cheating, and someone switching their tab, does that also, like, would you catch if it was like an incognito tab or something like that?
Yeah, so anytime they leave the window, it will catch it. For example, I've got two screens. If I even click on my second monitor, it will capture that I've clicked on the second monitor. So everything will be recorded throughout.
Okay, awesome. And then another one I was thinking about is just, and you mentioned this several times, that with so much changing with AI, specifically within engineering, I've been hearing a lot about like vibe coding and using Claude Code and how oftentimes that code is incorrect, right? And so I'm sure what's top of mind for engineering leaders is, can an engineer catch those errors, right? So one, I'm wondering, have you been getting requests? Because you have the ChatGPT and the Google search plugins. Have you been getting any requests for Cloud Code or other tools like that? And or how are teams thinking about this new kind of era of engineering?
Yeah, great question. Actually, I had a call with a customer just before this session talking about this exact subject. Short answer is yes. Of course, we're thinking about Claude Code. It's being discussed at a strategic level. Can't share much outside of that, but it's something we're looking into. When it comes to the LLM giving the wrong answer, we've actually got a specific vibe coding question that does that on purpose. So the
Okay.
candidate, if they paste the question into the LLM, it will give them the wrong answer. Then they have to catch what was wrong about that answer and solve it. So yeah, it's something that's coming up more frequently. We're always thinking about ways to improve the experience for hiring teams so they get signals based on the rate that things are changing with AI. So yeah, something we're definitely thinking about.
Yeah, and even like you mentioned, when ChatGPT first got rolled out and it was very much like, let's make sure people aren't using it. And now it's like, no, we need to make sure they're using it in a very effective way. That happened quickly, right? So I think the changes are just happening so quickly. It sounds like you guys are super on top of that, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's wild how quickly
Yeah,
things are changing. It seems like every week there's a new update that
right.
comes up.
Yeah. So, any questions? Would love to hear from you all. I'm sure you have questions that have come up. Looks like some are already being answered in the chat. I'll read Shelby's. You may have already gone over this. Is there an API option to link our ATS or HIIS? Yes, we integrate with over 40 ATSs. It's just a few clicks. That's great. What other questions are there?
And just on that, we also do have a custom API. So if we don't have an integration that exists with your ATS, there's normally a solution we can come to. So it'll be great to understand what you're using, and we can work with you on that.
Great. And then there was another chat, just in case people didn't see it. Does the platform allow for location verification? For example, if the candidate indicates they're based in the US, is there a way to see if the assessment was completed in the US as well? A lot of fraudulent candidates out there. And Talia said, yes, they do. So thank you for that.
Yeah. For sure. And actually, I was reading a report recently that says by 2027, not to scare everyone on the call, but a quarter of all candidates will be somewhat fraudulent. So, yes, we do track exactly where candidates are when they're taking the assessment, and you can see that in the report. So, if you're only hiring in the US, but suddenly you see lots of candidates completing the assessment somewhere else, that would also be a bit of a signal and something you'd want to consider.
I was just interviewing a candidate, I think this was last week, and his like video kept glitching in like a very weird way. Like it kind of kept flashing something, and I was like, is this guy real? But I looked through our database and multiple other recruiters had met with him. So it was really this thing where like it's always in the back of my head. Like, is this person real and are they really who they say they are?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's become big
Yep.
business where companies are really leveraging the fact that a lot of companies are remote still. I've heard stories of one person having 13 jobs at one time before getting caught. So definitely something you want to pay attention to.
Absolutely. Yep. Well, awesome. We just have a couple minutes left, unless there are any last questions. And please feel free to put them in the chat if you do, and we'll catch them before we log off here. But I'll just say a quick couple last words here. Nick, thank you so much. This was just incredibly powerful, and thank you to you and Canditech for doing such amazing work in our space. Again, as a recruiter of 17 years, I find it increasingly difficult to figure out if someone can actually do the job that we're hiring them for. So it seems like you just have figured out a lot of how to do this and how to do it right. So thank you again for being here and for hosting with us. And yeah, just wanted to say thank you for everyone who's attended today. Again, we will send out the recording. We'll send out Nick's contact information so you can reach out to him directly. And we'll put that link in there as well if you'd like to book a demo. And again, you get 30 days free and 50 assessments to send out to candidates. So I think it's a really valuable offer. And then just last but not least, for anyone again who doesn't know what Talent Collective is, we are a community for women in recruiting. So if you're looking for more connection, if you're looking for more professional development just like this, please feel free to reach out to me and check out our website. A couple of other interesting events that we have coming up in the next month or two. Some of those topics are how to influence and convincing leadership about your HR technology and making sure it's a good investment. And then we also have something coming up on the hiring market in 2026. So keep an eye out on the rest of our virtual events. We'd love to have you all back. And thank you again to Nick and the Canditech team. We are so happy to be partnering with you and look forward to the next one.
Krista, thank you for setting this all up. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining the session today as well.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye bye.
Thank you.
bye.